about the bird family history here in Egeria Park and the Yampa area.
Well, I have a little bit from the oldest boy of my great-grandmother and grandfather, Mary Ellen and William Bird, that came in from Ohio, and they came in, or from Missouri. And this part right here was given to this Uncle Albert, was the oldest of the kids. And he had it told to one of his daughters. So he probably knows more about their coming in than anybody. They came in covered wagons. There was the Birds, the Phillipses, and probably several others. They had a pretty good bunch that came in. And they settled in Florissant, Colorado, which I've never been there. I don't know anything about it, but they ran wagons and shipping. When they got freighting, they did freighting work. Anyway, one night somebody stole their team of horses, and that team of horses had shoes on, but one of the shoes was broken, and they were able to track that team into the Egeria Park area, and they found them tied up to a tree around there in Yampa someplace, and they just untied them and told the guy that was there that those horses belonged to them, and they were taking them. And they looked the area over and decided, boy, this looks like fine country here. And so they returned later and went back up there to do the homesteads, through the Homestead Act. And as they built a little cabin of some kind, and they were out working in the fields one day, and John Phillips was with them, and they came back and found out that their cabin had been, everything gone out of it. John Phillips's boots were gone, and he'd been in the field with rubber boots. And so they got on their horses, and of course they all had guns, and away they went after the robbers. They ran into a couple of wagons full of people moving into the country, and they said they'd seen a group go through with a jack and riding horses, and the jack was packed with goods. So they rode on, and they came around the corner, and I don't know if, well, he knew. They shot, those two guys shot and killed his brother, Uncle Tom. And he went tending to Uncle Tom while the rest of the Birds and Phillipses began a real war going. And I guess they finally realized they weren't shooting anymore, and they went up and found them and found all their goods and went home and buried Uncle Tom before there was ever a cemetery in Yampa. They buried him above the ranch of Uncle Albert's place. So that's kind of his story. And they came in then and built, well, there's still part of it left out there on their land where Grandma came in, and she was very sad and upset about losing her son. But in later years, she loved Yampa Valley. So that was the beginning of the bird, and really, that Homestead Act brought a lot of people into the country. And the next thing I think that we want to talk about is the Teddy Roosevelt hunt. We didn't have much anything any evidence of anything about that, but I've got pictures here that people are welcome to come up and go through these albums. I didn't fix a board because I've got all my pictures in albums, but you're welcome to come up and look. Pick up one and look it over. But Teddy Roosevelt, we think, was hunting in Glenwood area. He loved doing mountain lions and bear. And my daughter-in-law, the other day, there's a lot of people didn't think that he'd ever been in the Yampa area, but she found a thing that was on the internet under ColoradoHeritageTravel.org, Yampa Journeys. And it says in the late 1800s, the town of Yampa was an important overnight stop for stagecoach lines that ran between Steamboat and Wolcott to the south and Overdoor Pass to the east. By the early 1900s, tourists arrived on new trail lines to camp, fish, and hunt in the Gore Range and Flattop Mountains. One of the most famous visitors to this area was President Teddy Roosevelt, who came to Egeria Park with a hunting party in search of the region's plentiful big game. And we think that's when these pictures were taken, when he came in. And we think that he was hunting already here for mountain lions with another guide around Glenwood area, and I think he stayed here for like 5 weeks, and he couldn't hunt with them anymore, so he booked a hunt, we think, with Scott Tigg. And Scott Tigg lived in Yampa. I didn't realize that he lived in Yampa, but he had a business there, a tin works business with Ulysses Bird. And Ulysses Bird is in these pictures on this hunting trip with Scott Tigg. Well, Scott Tigg may be in the picture, but I've never seen a picture of Scott Tigg, so I don't know if he's in the picture. If there's anybody that's got a picture of Scott Tigg, I'd love to have one. So, if there's questions about that hunt, or if anybody wants to see these pictures, just come on, and picture albums here, and you can sit in one of these chairs and look at that book. Yes.
What was the year that you came up here, when you decided you liked this area up here? Your family?
The year that my uncle was killed was in 1882. And that was the year that a lot of homesteaders were starting to come into the area. And we have no dates about the Roosevelt hunt, really, other than what I just read. All right.
Can you give us a brief overview on the family ties between the Birds and the Perrys?
My mother, Viola, was Viola Liddell, raised in Kansas. But her mother was a Perry. She was a sister to Oak Perry and Bertie Perry. And they came into this country a little later. That I've got a thing that written up here when the Perrys came in here. But anyway, Aunt May and Uncle Oat had a good ranch going over here in Toponas, and they sent my mother here to help them with the cooking and whatever in 1927. She was 17 years old. And there was a young fella whose sister happened to be May Perry that hung around quite a bit. And I think when she came, he hung around a lot more. And they were finally married in October the 3rd of 1927. So that being, Johnny being a bird And his sister May, being married to old Perry, who is my mother's uncle, made us, we can't even get away from being related to each other. If we wanted to, but we don't.
Tell us about the 12 years they were married before children.
Okay. My dad worked for road construction and ran a steam shuttle. And they went all over the state for construction jobs. And she followed him wherever she could go that she could get a place to stay and be with him. 12 years they did that, and no children. I think they didn't think there would be children. In the wintertime, they did some trapping. I have pictures in these albums of their fine trapping days. They hoed in the lettuce and spinach fields that the country was full of at that time. And when there wasn't a road construction job. My dad worked on the first road that went through Glenwood Canyon. And when he was working there, they rented a little house between Toponas and McCoy down in the canyon. And at that time, the road ran along the bottom of the canyon there. And Mother, of course, was alone a lot. And she walked up that road where the Kirbys lived. And I'm sure people here remember the Kirbys. And Mr. and Mrs. Kirby were still both alive, and she became very close friends with them and the ornery boys that they had. And they were friends still to this day, any of them that's around. And they had lots, I think Kenneth and Gladys were maybe married at the time, so I don't think he was there, but my dad knew Kenneth from early years, and they were lifetime friends. And what was the rest of that question? I get off on one thing before another.
Well, you pretty much covered about the Kirby boys and them coming fishing after the war.
Yeah, well, I'll tell about the 12 years and when all of a sudden they found out they were going to have a child, which was me. And at that time they were living just west of Toponas Rock in a little house. And that's, Mother went to the Oak Creek, there was a hospital in Oak Creek, and had me, and that's where I lived, but of course I remember nothing about that. They decided they better quit doing road construction and settle down, and they bought the ranch west of Finger Rock where I was raised, and that's where my first memories are from. My first memory was probably when my brother came along in 1943. And I was going to have, of course I didn't know I was going to have a sibling. And in those days, they picked her up from the hospital. They weren't allowed to get up and move around. They had to rest for 10 days after having a baby. So they took her to the Phillips place, Lewis and Fanny Phillips's, and put her in a bedroom. And then I had to stay there during the day while my dad was feeding cows and milking cows, and Aunt Fanny wouldn't let me go see my brother and my mother. I didn't like her very well about that time. So my dad would take me home at night and then take me to Fanny's, I'm sure, for breakfast in the morning. And when he was done with his work, he would pick me up and, I'm sure he ate supper first and pick me up and take me back to the ranch, and that went on. Finally, they got to bring him home after 10 days or so. Those are the beginning of my memories of living up there at that ranch.
Tell us about some of the outhouse tips in the winter and then electricity coming to South Rock.
Well, yeah, there was no electricity at the ranch. And they had signed up for REA and Steamboat, and they were getting power poles dug, holes dug for the power poles. She's got in her diaries all about my dad out digging holes for power poles and the hopes of getting electricity. But there was none then, and I remember very well when we were using kerosene lamps and lanterns and all that. And yes, there was an outhouse that seemed like it was a mile away from the house to go to, but there was big bad storms there from time to time. My dad tried to keep the path cleaned out to get to the outhouse, but anyway, this was the outhouse. In the winter time when there was one in every bedroom.
And you being the oldest got to dump that?
No. I think my dad got to dump, I think my father got to dump it, then mother got to clean it. But it worked.
Can you explain the video scope?
Okay. Tell me that video scope. I don't know how many of you are old enough to remember these video scopes. Hand me one of those pictures. You put the picture right in there. Put the picture in there, double pictures, and then when you look through it, you could adjust it to where you could see the picture as one big picture. So I brought pictures that I have of Teddy Roosevelt when he was in the White House in these video things. So you can come and look at all these. Then I brought a few other pictures of people to work, but this was our television in the old days. There was no TV, and everybody's house we went to had one, and we liked looking at the pictures. They've got them from all over the world, pictures. So we learned a lot through the video scope.
Can you tell us about the brandings and the butchering of the hogs?
Well, that was a neighborhood thing. Neighbors helped neighbors all the time. If there was a branding, the neighbors were all there. And the women were in the kitchen cooking big meals. And they butchered hogs together. They helped with the haying together. They helped plow the roads together. Neighbors were real neighbors back in those days.
Can you tell us some Johnny Bird hunting stories and the Zane Grey hunt?
I don't know a lot about the Zane Grey hunt. I just know my dad fussed about it a little bit. He thought Zane Grey was full of himself, but that was another hunt that was arranged by Scott Teague. And I don't know if I've got it written down. I've got a bunch of stuff written down here, but I don't remember what year that was. But Teague had a bunch of hounds, and they went hunting, and Zane Grey was writing a book at the time, The Mysterious Rider, I believe was the book he was writing at the time. So.
And he stayed on Sunnyside while he wrote that book, is that correct?
I believe so. I believe so. I've written some of things. My mother started a diary in 1944, June, and that her birthday was right then. I'm thinking somebody gave her the diary. And so I've written down a few excerpts from the diary. One of the things I was going to tell you about the Teddy Roosevelt trip. When he became president, it says here, he was picturesque, noisy, colorful, and in ways that amused and absorbed the press, worried the elders of his party, and delighted the country. To his admirers, he was outstanding and comparable symbol of virility in his time. That was printed by a Mark Sullivan. A stream of fresh, pure, bracing air from the mountains to clear the fetid atmosphere of the national capital. Harry Thurston Peck. The most striking figure in American life, Thomas Edison. While to others, some of whom had once been his friends, he was that damn cowboy, drunk with himself.
You want to share your mother's diary now?
Yeah. It pretty much was the same thing year-round about their work. What they did on the ranch was pretty normal, regular work. But she'd write about the hay fields and the garden. She had a big garden. And my dad cleaned out the chicken house every year and put it on the garden and plowed it. And she started planting usually in May. She'd tell the planting days and plant everything but her beans. She'd plant her beans, her green beans, in middle of June. And then later on, in about middle of July, beginning of August, she'd write the beans froze last night. So she traded peas. She raised way too many peas. But she traded peas to the ladies in town for beans, because they could raise beans in town. But up there on the ranch, we got the frost. And she raised lots of cabbage. They made lots of sauerkraut. I think this was true of most people in those days. They had a cellar and kept carrots all winter in the cellar. They raised some potatoes, but bought big sacks of potatoes from Charlie Forrester in the Gulf. She canned spinach, peas. She canned 90 quarts of peas one winter. I still like peas. I don't know why, but I do. And then they made trips to Palisade for their peaches, pears, grapes, made jelly, juice. She had canned day and night when they got back from one of those trips. But even when they butchered the pigs, she canned the pork, she canned any beef they had. She rendered lard after they butchered the pigs for days at a time, because that's what we used, lard, and we bought bacon by the side, and it still had the rind on it. So that's what we fried everything. She'd have a roast once in a while, or a stew, but everything was fried. We used bacon grease and lard to fry it in. And she lived to be 96 years old, so maybe it wasn't all that bad. She raised chickens. She always got chickens in the spring, little baby chickens. When you went to the post office, it was so loud with the baby chickens and they're peeping in there that you could hardly hear. And then she put them in the brooder house, and about August, they're starting to be big enough to butcher them. mostly the roosters, and we had fried chicken and homemade ice cream almost every Sunday. Then she had to can the chickens, so she'd can the old hens, and we had chicken and noodles almost every weekend in the winter. We didn't have a refrigerator, we had an ice box. And of course, I think most of you around the country knew there was a big, big ice shed between, Round Trapper siding there at Toponas. And we always had to get sawdust to keep our ice from melting, and kept it in the little ice box until we finally got a refrigerator. She said everybody in the country had rhubarb patch. So in the spring, we were ready for something fresh, and I can remember my grandma Bird digging dandelions to make a salad out of. And we had lots of pies made out of rhubarb. And I like to chew on it raw, but broke out the hives every time. But it didn't stop me, I still chewed on raw rhubarb. Let's see. My dad in the summer worked for the Forest Service, and they rode the irrigation ditch. So they had to build fence, and he was away from home doing all that. Then the hay season started, and we got a lot of showers and rain, and especially through the hay season. So they'd mow, and everything was team horses, and rake, and get ready to go, and then we'd have a sprinkle, and you'd have to wait and salt the thing down to keep it from molding. Mother ran the sweep rake, which was built out of an old model cars, and she would get out there and make piles of hay to bring to the stacker. And they had a team of horses on the plunger pole to get the hay up to the stack, which I ran that when I got old enough to do it. Probably 10 years old, I was running that thing. Her sister and her husband, Ollie and Chet Sanders, were in the country, and they helped with the haying a lot. We had a couple of good beaver ponds over south of the house. A lot of people came and liked to fish in those beaver ponds and catch fish and bring them to Mother to cook. Oh yeah, we had a lot of magpies at our place. My dad hated magpies. And we had a lot of milk cows. We probably had 8-10 milk cows to have to milk every night and every morning. And he had a big barrel that he'd throw the skim milk in, and they'd throw vegetables and stuff in for slop for the hogs. And the magpies, of course, loved it there. Well, he wanted to shoot them magpies, so Mother decided she could get them because they were just not far from the house. She'd shoot through the screen door so it wouldn't scare them when she shot. So we had to replace a lot of screen in the screen door. But then he let my brother and I, when the magpies were nesting, he taught us to shoot a 22, and down on the north side of the house was a creek with fish in, with lots of willows and magpies in every nest. So we'd take the 22 and go down and stir up the magpies. We'd take turns with the 22. For every magpie we shot, we got 10 cents. And for every egg we could steal, we got a nickel. And it was great because then we could go to town. Old Doc Cole had a drugstore in town with nickel ice cream cones. We had homemade ice cream all the time, but those nickel ice cream cones were the best. All right. in the summer of 44, she wrote that Gary, being a year old, started walking June the 22nd. I think I already told you about the beaver dams and the showers that happen season. Oh, we had a little cabin out back from the house that somebody was living in all the time. My Uncle Hoyle lived there one summer. And after my granddad Bird, Frank Bird, died, Grandma Bird lived out there one summer. And we used it for a playhouse a lot. We had, after Gary was born, we had the living room of our house was in the east end of the house, and the kitchen was in the west end of the house, but the bedrooms were off of the east end of the house by the living room. They decided they had to have another bedroom, so we had a guy come in, and the milk house was right there by the west side of the house, and they turned that into another bedroom. Some snippets. Keith and Betty Kirby married April 1st, 1948. Oak Creek doctors were Dr. Temple and Dr. Lindell. April 11th, 1947, still 5-foot drift of snow by the fence. President Franklin Roosevelt died April 12th, 1945. Okay. Annabelle and Ferris Kirby married May 14th, 1947. Actually, before that, those Kirby boys were all in the war, and as they came home, she wrote in the diary when they arrived, and they all came up to see the folks at the ranch when they got home. And then she wrote when they all got married. Howard and Ramona married June 8th, 1948. My dad belonged to the Toponas Roping Club, so he went to all the meetings a lot. Johnny Phillips died May 24th, 1948, and he was a favorite uncle. I loved him a lot. Dr. Mayle died July 15th, 1945. Polio started becoming a bad thing in 1946. Some of this stuff I've already talked about. I started school at Yampa when I was 5 years old, because I turned 6 in December, and my mother had already taught me how to write and do numbers, so I was a little bit ahead of the game. Also, there were ladies' clubs around. They had the Home Demonstration Club and the Ladies' Aid Club. And there was a little girl by the name of Sheila Rager that her mother belonged to Home Demonstration Club. And she and I became fast friends to the day she died, which just was 3 or 4 years ago. We had the regular measles in those days, had no vaccines for measles or chickenpox, either one. I had the chickenpox 3 different times. Every time they came around, I got them. And let's see. I guess that's the biggest part of her writings that I wrote down about.
What can you tell us about the Raglan place?
That was a fine pasture, Raglan place where we took the cows every summer. And as I got older, of course, I helped move the cows up to the Raglan place. I loved that. We had the Ageria pasture, and we took some in there. And in the wintertime, when Daddy was hauling hay, he kept the cows separated from the weaning. He had a weaning pen where he had to haul hay into that thing, and then we had to walk to the weaning pen to feed the steers every evening or morning, and that was became one of my jobs. One of my jobs as I got older was haul coal to the house from the coal barn, and then I learned to milk cows at a pretty early age. Anything that I could do with my dad outside, that's what I liked.
Is there anything else you want to share with us here today?
I don't know. Oh, I was gonna tell you this, which they're up here and people can look at them. Sheila Joe, before she died, mailed me these snippets of history from the Yampa Leader newspapers. The first one she mailed was March 5th, 1904. And she kind of had gone through them and marked where any of the family history was at. There was one here that was kind of interesting. It said, which you all will kind of get an interest out of this. Vernal, Utah eggs are selling for 60 cents a dozen, and scarce at that. Yampa people think 40 cents, the price prevailing here, is bad enough. But things have changed since then. But you're welcome to come up here when I'm done and look all this stuff over and ask any questions that you need to think about, and we'll go from there.
What can you tell us about the Shelmus's bird meadow?
There what?
The bird meadow?
I don't know what you're talking about.
It was on my notes.
Is Jerry here? He can tell you about it.
He went.
I don't think.
Jerry bought the bird hunting camp on the Flat Tops.
Okay.
He what?
When Jerry Shelmus and Johnny Shelmus bought the bird hunting camp on the Flat Tops.
Oh, well, see, and I don't remember that, because that was probably, I mean, I know that they did, but it didn't make, don't think I think I was grown by then. So.
Well, we want to thank you for coming. We sure appreciate it.
Thank you, too.
Again, we just want to thank everybody. Feel free to stay and visit and eat. We will have our donation bucket out. We are doing our yearly membership drive. And so we'd like for any of you that would like to become members, We've got a lot of activities coming. June 22nd, we're going to have a dinner and a barn dance. This will be our barn. We're going to have a Toponas dance again. I don't know, it may end up in Highway 131. We don't know where we're going. But we're going to have a revival of the old times on June 22nd. We are continuing on with our production of our book. So that's a big project, biggest for Marissa. I'd like to thank everyone. Andy and Bria Watson have helped immensely on the building. Andy Schaffner, Rod Olinger did our floor for us as a total donation, and we are so appreciative of that. So we've had a lot of community interest and a lot of community support to get our community hall back up and going and some activities going. So we're excited about it, and the memberships are $75 a year per family.
I thought of something else.
Okay, go ahead.
This stage here, we used to have Christmas programs here all the time. And I was up giving a little, what'd she call it? Mother called it a piece. It was, this is Mother's knives and forks. This is Mother's table. This is Mother's looking glass. This is the baby's cradle. I was standing there talking to it. June Perry was handling the curtain, and he closed the curtain on me right in the middle of my big speech. And so I just started talking louder. Finally he realized what he'd done and got the curtain open. We had lots of dances up here, and about everyone ended up in a big fight out there in front.
I have a question. Can you tell us who's, about the saddle that's up there? Whose
I don't
saddle
know
is?
about it.
Nope.
That's a saddle that Johnny Bird built. That's a pack saddle. So if you take a look at it, you know, that's his creation when he was packing the elk and deer out.
Okay, I think Johnny Bird can saddle.
Great, thanks, Jeff.
Good. So, I think we can mill around and visit and come look at all this stuff you want to. I got a teddy bear here and a picture of me and the teddy bear together. We've been through some rough times together since then.
The other thing that used to be funny was Rube Squire, which had the place where Gumwicks were, and I guess Fisher Body ended up with it. But they used to, because Rube was always looking for lost gold, and anywhere he dug, he got water. But I think they helped spike stuff, you know, with maybe gold dust or something like that, and tell Rube, I think there's some gold over there, and I think go over and look and start digging holes. So I think that's kind of what I remember right now, and I'll let my brother Chuck tell you a little bit more.
Yeah, Johnny and Dad and we used to love to hunt. We'd go up Coberly and so we'd hunt, and of course we'd drive up there in that Jeep. I think it was, what was it, 47 Jeep, Bill?
Mm-hmm.
And the Perrys had this idea that you did not drive with your lights on. So we would leave in the middle of the, you know, it was quite early. We might be 4 o'clock, we were in the meadow, it was dark. And we would drive up to Coberly without any lights on, and we'd get in where our stands were. And then we'd wait for the elk, deer to come in, and there were a lot of times we'd just about freeze to death. So we would all do the early hunt, and then we'd come back down and meet in the center part of Coberly, and that was kind of where we'd sit down, we'd have a fire. And Johnny would be telling stories. And many times, we would have a little campfire going, there'd be smoke billowing, and then here come the elk. Come right up to the, you know, the elk were kind of curious, and we always thought that, you know, the smoke was supposed to keep the elk away, but it seemed to me that the elk would come over and see what was going on. And this picture of this last elk we have, that occurred when Johnny was 80 years old. And Dad and I and Johnny were sitting by a campfire, and Johnny was telling a story. And here came that spiked bull. So we wanted Johnny to get that bull, and so sure enough, he shot that bull. And so I cleaned it, and Dad went down, and they got that little trailer, and we went back up and pulled that spike down. But I want you to look at that picture, because if you'll see on the spike on the horn, you're gonna see the tag of that license that properly on that elk. It's a rule, if you're hunting in Colorado, you can clean your elk, but when you got ready to transport it, you were to tag the elk. Now, as soon as you shot the elk and filled your license, you were to detach it from the little packet you had, and then as soon as you got it elk cleaned or something, you were supposed to tag it. Johnny had a way of hunting. If he would see an elk, he always said if you can run with them the first 50 yards, they'll usually stop. And if you can keep up with them, you'll be able to get a shot. So he would hunker down pretty low, and he had these little steps, you know, but boy, he was moving right with those elk. He had a Savage Model 99 300 Savage lever action rifle, and Johnny liked it because there was no exposed hammer. And then he had a hooded front sight, and instead of the conventional front sight he had made a crosshair of gold, little small gold thread, or it was metal, but it looked like a little crosshair made of gold. So you look to the rear sight and to the front sight, instead of the front sight, you'd see a little cross. I always thought that was pretty unique. After he sold his ranch, he and Viola spent many winters. They'd be going down to Mexico, and it was on the inner side in the Baja, and Johnny liked to go down there and fish. So he had got a little flat boat out there, and a little bit wider than a canoe, and so we would fish in that. And then he got this idea, if he'd build like an outrigger on it, so he could fish, and he could get those red snappers, and then he could put those snappers right on that little side cable, and he could clean the fish right there. And he had a little sail on it, and, you know, and it was always very strong because he'd always run that boat in and out of the water. Well, it was camped there, and there was people next that had watching for him and knew about what time he should be returning. But Johnny was about an hour late. And what had happened, the wind had come up, and he couldn't, catch that sail in time, and that wind tipped him over right in the ocean, and he did not know how to swim. And he just lucky he popped up right underneath that outrigger in that boat. And he still feels very lucky because, you know, you couldn't see him from shore, but the guy kind of knew where he was, and he came out with a little boat and happened to find Johnny, and then towed him back in to the beach, and he got back to Yampa, and he put something else on the other side to kind of balance him out. But Johnny stayed in a place. The Mexican family had had that for years, and they grew tequila cactuses. And I don't know how many years Johnny went down there, 12, 15, I don't know. But they always took clothes and stuff for donation to the kids running around. But this family where he'd been camping for years, and finally made friends with the owner, and he said, yeah, you can, just camp wherever you want. Johnny was always happy to go down there, and he liked getting out of the snowbank. So he was a snowbird.
Well, I thought he had a kayak. Didn't he buy a kayak?
Well, maybe that's what why it tipped. Yeah, it was a damn kayak, and they're tough. They're tough to keep upright, that's for sure. Let alone having it in the ocean. Yeah. So anyway, he built that little outrigger on there, put a sail on there, so he wouldn't have to go so far. But in that kayak, he also had put little arms in there so he could row it like a conventional rowboat. That's what it was, yeah. So no wonder it tipped over.
Well, and I know that they came back from one of their trips, and I always wondered what Viola did while they were down there, because Johnny was out fishing all the time. Well, it turns out Viola was walking along the shore, because it was the ocean right there in Baja, and she was picking up all these very, very tiny little seashells. And
Well,
she
that's
would
right.
collect all of them.
Yeah.
And then she would make pictures of the seashells so that they looked like little flowers and a face and everything, and put it together and put it on a velvet backing and put it in a little picture frame. And we had one at one time.
Well, something else about Johnny Bird. He only wore a suit twice. And he had the same suit that he got married in. When he had the 50th wedding anniversary, he wore it.
But Johnny was also, he was a good jockey, because he's small and he's strong in the arms. So they had people hire him to race their horses. And I don't remember the name of this horse, but it was a fast mare, I guess. And they would take it to, Steamboat and Eagle and all around to do match races and get a bunch of money. And then Johnny's riding that horse and he kept winning. So they kept going to rodeos. This one year, nobody would race them because they knew they couldn't win.
Mm-hmm.
So they loaded him up in just a small pickup. They had a stock rack on it. So one night, they decided they better dye that horse, and maybe a different color, maybe they make some money. They got to the rodeo, but they got into a little bit of a rainstorm, and some of that dye was coming off, so it looked kind of goofy, but anyway, they were able to get a few horses to run. But then after the bets were made, it had rained a little more, and then that dye had run off that horse. But they were upset because they still lost money.
The other thing about the Bird family, though, that I didn't say about, they used to supply all the meat for all the mines over in Breckenridge and stuff.
Of course, my dad, his favorite uncle was Johnny Bird because he liked to hunt and fish, and so he learned quite a bit from Johnny. And that first time when they opened up the wilderness area up here for hunting up toward Trapper's Lake, I think probably 72 or so, Dad put in for a group hunting license, and I had him draw, so I got to go up there with him. But that summer, I think in July, him and Johnny packed in the stove and built a little corral and cut a bunch of firewood. So when we went up, Dad and I went up to hunt that country. It was a nice, about the 10th of October, first week of October is just beautiful. We got up there, got horse set up, got the camp set up, and the other thing they had done is they'd dug that spring out, so there was water. That night, it snowed 3 feet. And I kept waking up, and I had that white gas, that white kerosene gas for lanterns. And I'd take a cap full of that white fuel and throw on that fire to keep us warm. And then one time I didn't get out of the way fast enough, and the fire came out and kind of burned my mustache. And but we got up, and of course we saw all that snow, and Dad said, "We got to get out of here." So he took me for a ride. He said, "If you ever come back here, this is how they run." But that night Dad had a hard time breathing, because that's over 11,000 feet up there. And Dad said, "This is too high. I'll never be able to come back here." So we're breaking camp, and we had a Ute, Babe. That was her first hunt. And then we might have had Sam, the pack horse. I think it was Sam.
Was it Gertie?
Gertie. Nah, probably Gertie.
Because she was the one that Dick and Tom packed out elk and stuff. Because she's like 19 hands tall, but she.
Yeah, it might have been Gertie. Anyway, so we were packing the tent up, and we were just up. The only horse we had tied up was Ute, and we just had him bridle on tied him to a tree. Well, the other horse is right there. Ute decided it's time to leave, and so he rubs the bridle off and takes off, and here come the other horses with him. And here I've been in California, where it's 285 feet above sea level for about 2 years, and you know, they were always running me around, you know, military. You think you're in pretty good shape, you gotta run. And well, my dad smoked 2 packs of cigarettes a day. He was up 11,000 feet. He's, what was he, probably about 54, 55 or so. And that's almost 3 feet of snow. He outruns me to catch that horse through 2.5, 3 feet of snow.
That's incredible. He did not want to walk home.
He did not.
About Zane Grey.
Yeah.
Johnny hated Zane Grey because he was a celebrity. He'd come to town and everybody was happy to see him. And according to Johnny, he drank quite a bit. But Johnny thought Zane's brother was all right, but Zane was not nice, or he didn't have any respect for him because he kind of hung over, and everybody was happy to see the big famous Arthur in Yampa, Colorado, and they brought out a wonderful horse for him to ride. It was white, nice horse, good ranch horse. So he saddled him up, and Zane gets on board him, but Zane's wearing these big old Mexican spurs, big old rowels. And so he gets gathered up, and then he decides he's going to poke the horse with that spurs. Well, most ranch horses don't need spurs. So Zane pokes that horse with the spurs, horse bucks him up right in front of the Hamlet's bar, right downtown Yampa. As he's now, Zane's embarrassed.
I thought he was knocked out for 3 hours.
Well, I don't know how long he was knocked out, but he was embarrassed. Well, he gets back on the horse. He decides they're going to show everybody he can ride a horse. So he gets on there with those spurs, and he cuts out the horse's shoulders, and that horse is bleeding from the shoulders because of the spurs. So Johnny was like a camp boy, and so he was in charge of putting the tents up and the sleeping bags and stuff on there. Well, cut all the pine boughs on to make a mattress, but in Zane's tent, he always put rocks underneath the pine boughs for Zane to sleep on, because Zane was a donkey. And he said Zane never told anything, never complained to him, but he'd go back in there in the morning, you know, to clean the tent out, and of course those rocks would be out from underneath the pine boughs. When Oak died, Jim Munzert and I stayed with Johnny out in the desert. And Johnny had a camp trailer down there, and it's down where Scottsdale is now. But there was Jolly's, High Jolly's date farm is down there. And he loved date milkshakes, so he took Jim Munzer and I down to High Jolly's and we got a date milkshake. But his camp in the desert, he had big old saguaro cactuses, but this one cactus, that was a bird or something, and like a big old woodpecker, he had carved out a notch in that cactus, and Johnny put a shaving mirror in that hole in the cactus, so then he get a pan of water and put it on the other edge of that cactus, and so he could look in the mirror and shave right there in that cactus. So I thought that was nice.